Mr. Chairman, we have had some concerns at the powers. Some of those.
Are you calling?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
You must call. You just don't continue speaking.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Cam Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had some concerns expressed at the location of powers, the approval of the recovery strategy and the recovery plans. And there was some concern that they should not be held by ministers but be augmented by local government structure. We did not agree with this. We believe the recovery process is beyond the capability of current institutions, and new institutional arrangements with specific powers are required. There will be opportunities for significant community participation in the recovery plan. There was also some concerns expressed by a submitter and taken on board and looked at carefully that considers the purpose provision is too wide and that it should be a precondition for the exercise of the executive and coercive powers. We do not agree with this. We do not think it's necessary to outline criteria for when and why Sarah or the Minister can exercise powers. Significant checks and balances have been built into the Act to ensure that powers are only exercised in accordance with the purpose of the Act and only if reasonably necessary, as well as the exercise of a statutory power being subject to judicial review. The bill also contains other significant protections. Now, some of these are that the power to require information can only be used when the information can be provided without unreasonable difficulty or expense. Before disseminating information, the Chief Executive must consider the privacy principles under the Privacy Act 1993 and the need to protect confidential and commercially sensitive information. The person exercising the power of entry must produce evidence of authorisation and, where practicable, must be exercised at a reasonable time and give prior notice of entry. Before exercising a survey power, the Chief Executive must consult with the Surveyor General, and where there is a dispute mechanism put into place where landowners disagree with the definition process. In undertaking building works, a notice is required to be served on owners, occupiers and other persons with an interest in the land. In exercising powers of direction and step-in rights regarding councils and council organisations does not include the ability to collect rates or take any action or make any other decision-making affecting powers affecting rates. Mr. Chairman, there are many other checks and balances, but at this point I will finish here and I commend this bill to the House.
Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was interesting to hear the member opposite talk about what perhaps was his and maybe some other members of the Select Committee's first visit to Christchurch since the February 22 quake, and to hear from him how different it is to see it, even if one's seen it on television, to seen it in the newspaper, to actually see the scale of destruction that's been wreaked on our city by that awful disaster. But I have to say this, that living in Christchurch through the last 7 weeks and indeed over the last 7 months is another layer of experience for you. And that's why I took great exception to the comments by Louise Upston earlier around members of the opposition supposedly engaging in petty politics in respect of this bill and these issues. If it is petty to advocate for my constituents who have no running water, who have no toilets in many instances, who have broken homes, then I plead guilty to being petty. If it's political to advocate for businesses who faced enormous frustration in the CBD of Christchurch to get access to their premises so they can get hard drives and stock and have some hope of continuing their businesses and keeping people in jobs, then I plead guilty to being petty. If it's petty to say that thousands of Cantabrians are going to be cold this winter because they will not have new heating units installed or they will not have insulation installed to try and make sure they get through winter without getting sick and ill, then I will plead guilty to being political and petty. And if it's petty or political to say that it's not satisfactory for the Deputy Mayor of the City Council of my city to learn about the bill which will for 5 years take control of the City of Christchurch with huge impact on the City Council and every other organisation, institution and person across Christchurch, then I say I am guilty of being petty. But I would also, like my colleagues, have been active, have stepped in to assist thousands of constituents who've been affected by the quakes, and I acknowledge that's been across the House. I'm not trying to be petty and political about it. I've worked with my political opponent opposite. I've acknowledged her in meetings that I've chaired, given her speaking rights. If that's being petty and political, well, I'm guilty as charged. It is absolutely critical that we take every opportunity in the very short time frame that this bill provides to get it right. Our experience and the experience of this Parliament is that rushed legislation is poor legislation. Almost inevitably, rushed legislation requires some return to the House to make amendments to correct faults that were there and not seen as the rush went through. That is why it is so important that we maximise the opportunities of the Select Committee process, that submitters to the Select Committee actually were given drafts of the bill. Not one lawyer at the Christchurch City Council, but councillors who turned out yesterday and spent nearly half the day sitting and waiting to make their submission and hearing other submissions. Councillors Yanni Johansson, Helen Broughton, the Deputy Mayor Nari Button, Glenn Livingston, Chrissy Williams and Community Board member Paul McMahon, who gave up their time, who wanted to be there representing for their constituencies, who wanted to know how this bill will impact upon them, but were reduced to having to ring my colleague Clayton Cosgrove and beg for the bill to be put on the parliamentary website so they could actually see what was intended for the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority and what it meant for them as councillors and community board members. That is not acceptable, and we have to point that out. And if that's being petty, well, I will plead guilty to that. The submitters were only learning of the bill from media and other sources. That's not correct. And if you want to talk about pettiness within the Select Committee, then I think members opposite might need to look at some of their own members who caused the chair some frustration through the course of the bill. We are now in the committee stages approaching the committee stages of the bill, and we still have no government's SOP, which is indicated to us by a summary of the submissions and the government's response as being quite extensive. That is not satisfactory. That is not satisfactory when wide changes are being signalled. We need to know precisely what the government is intending so we can avoid the risks that are there through rushed legislation. We need to maximise the chance for members of this House to give scrutiny to those SOPs and ensure that they are going to do the best thing for our city, to make sure we actually have the best chance for real, genuine community engagement in the process. Let me talk about that just for a moment. In Marlborough, about 10 years ago, as editor of the local paper, I saw a very real issue, Mr Chair, around the fact that that province had the lowest wage rates in the country. I looked for a model, a template, to see what I could do to try and get the community behind an initiative which ended up forming the Marlborough Economic Development Trust. I got a just-printed book from an American academic called Dr. Michael Briand. It was a summary of how the most successful communities in the United States had rebuilt themselves, had re-engineered themselves to take up economic and other opportunities. The first and overriding principle of that book, and I think of any community engagement process, was inclusion. If people do not feel a part of a process, they will not buy into it, they will not accept incomes, they'll be cynical about it, and no matter how much top-down soothing and stroking you do, they will not buy into the process. That is why it's so important for the Minister to acknowledge that in the processes that he's putting in place under his community forum, that he actually looks to allow genuine public engagement. And it is not something that anybody wants to drag their heels on. Nobody wants to see that. We must have a process which allows those with a real, genuine commitment, and there are many people across Christchurch with a passionate commitment to their city. They want to be involved. Businesses have had much heartache already over the last 7 weeks in terms of access. They must be represented on that panel in number. People with an interest in the heritage of our city, they want to be involved. They're not advocating to save every building. That's gone. I can speak from personal experience on this. My electorate office lost its entire front on February the 22nd in 20 seconds. I will not even dream of asking for any rescue of that building. I will not even dream of asking people to go into that building and rescue goods out of it. I acknowledge that building has gone its history, but I do say that we need to maintain the maximum amount of our infrastructure in Christchurch, because we will not be able to rebuild rapidly if we have every second building knocked over. We must keep the viable infrastructure, be it heritage or not, repair it, strengthen it and put it back into service ASAP, and that will assist the recovery of our city, because if we only have a CBD full of cranes, we will have green space across our CBD for a generation, and that will not assist those businesses that want to get back into business, are able to restart relatively quickly. I'm immensely proud and supportive of the initiative from inner city businesses who want to get some sense of life underway by show weekend at the beginning of November. That's a fantastic time frame, but it will require the demolition, yes, of those buildings which cannot be saved, but I would suggest the propping up of some buildings which can be saved and the restoration and repair of other buildings which need to be saved. We need voices who can advocate on those things, who can have a word in the minister's ear, who can sit at that forum and can actually say to him, these are things that need to be taken on board. There are also, I think, represented on that forum need to be members of the community boards who dot themselves across the city of Christchurch, who are an underused forum at the moment, but they have deep connected roots into the community. The Concern organisation has sprung up in the last 6 or 7 months. It's got networks right the way across just about all of the affected communities. They should be part of that forum as well. Those affected communities not represented by Concern deserve to have their voices also heard at that forum. We should be seeing also, I think, representatives of the councils on the forum as well. We should see members of the education, health communities there also. They are hugely affected by the quake. We have dozens of schools still not fully operative. We have damage to our major hospital site. We have some damage at Princess Margaret. Those voices must be heard as we come through. There are major public health risks around the months that follow through from the quake in terms of many thousands of damaged homes. Many homes will be damp. People will be overcrowded in many instances. The health voice must be represented. And I want to see this SOP to see if there's any indication in it of what the processes are going to be in respect of the real opportunities the Minister might provide for community engagement, for community participation, so we are assured that Christchurch's voices will be heard as we all engage rapidly in the recovery of our city. Everybody wants to see it move quickly. Everybody wants to have their sector represented, a voice for them, and we need to see the SOP Minister ASAP so we can all be assured that it can contain some of the changes that we're advocating for. It's not petty politics, it's important politics.
Amy Adams.